In every friend group, there's that one person that doesn't quite belong. Nobody really likes them, but nobody hates them enough to kick them out. Their presence is just sort of tolerated. They have some dirty laundry. Maybe they cheat on their wife or sell drugs on the side, things you genuinely disagree with, but not enough to actually do anything about it. They provide some sort of benefit to the group. Maybe they can get you into exclusive clubs, or they're the only ones with access to a car. Something that makes people look past the bones in their closet, which is an open secret, by the way. Everyone knows, but nobody brings it up because they want access to whatever they provide. Turkey is that friend to the United States and NATO. And just like any other friend group, the longer we ignore that one friend's less awesome qualities, the more likely they are to keep doing it. This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Most Americans tend to look at history through the lens of American history, which is fine. We all need a reference point. After World War II was the Cold War. Before that was the Depression and World War I. But before that, Reconstruction, the Civil War, Manifest Destiny, all internal history. The rest of the world still existed, you know. The American version of World War I is that Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated and a complicated system of military alliances led to the First Global War, which is mostly true. But it's not like Europe was just sitting there with these overlapping defense treaties waiting for something to set it off. The main cause of World War I was nationalism. Nationalism is like toxic patriotism. It's fine to be proud of your country, but when that pride leads to excluding anyone who you don't view as being part of it, you've got a problem. And that's what was going on in Europe in the lead up to World War I. Archduke Ferdinand wasn't just assassinated for kicks. The guy who killed him was a member of Young Bosnia, a Yugoslav and Serbian nationalist group fighting for a unified Balkan region. He was also a member of the Black Hand, a Serbian nationalist group. Late 1800s Europe was a mess of nationalist, independence, and separatist movements on top of all of the conventional wars and changing borders common to the region. A few of these movements are important to the story I'm about to tell. The Russo-Turkish War occurred between 1877 and 1878. Historians aren't the most creative when it comes to naming things, especially things they consider to be minor. It ended with the Russian occupation of eastern Turkey in order to address the Armenian Question. I really wish I was joking. That's what they called it during the Conference of Berlin in 1878. You see, the European powers were concerned with how the Muslim Ottoman Turks were treating Christians living in their empire. They were basically second-class citizens, with forced conversions and higher taxes and such. Europe was also concerned with giving Russia too much influence, though, so the occupation was essentially toothless and eventually ended, leaving the Armenian Question to the Turks. In 1890, the Ottoman Sultan created the Hamidiye, a paramilitary group tasked with answering the question. They were sort of like the Turkish Black and Tans, only 30 years before the actual Black and Tans. I suppose this is as good a time as any to tell you that the Turks really don't like the Armenians, seeing them as untrustworthy and disloyal. They did just cause a Russian occupation after all. The Hamidiye would intentionally incite Armenian rebellions within the empire for the sole purpose of putting them down. Get them to fight you so you can claim self-defense. These are known as the Hamidian Massacres, and they killed anywhere from 100 to 300,000 Armenians between 1894 and 1896. That is already more than Nanking, and the actual event hasn't started yet. In 1908, a group called the Young Turks overthrew the Sultan and reinstated the Ottoman Constitution and Parliament. While they were progressive and technically liberal, they were also a nationalist group. The Ottoman Empire was the best, and anyone saying otherwise was an enemy, and asking a foreign power to intervene in internal politics was downright blasphemous. Those pesky Armenians asking for equality. The Young Turks envisioned a homogeneous state in Anatolia, run by Turks for Turks. Turkey belongs to the Turks, and Skyrim belongs to the Nords. They didn't like minorities in power, or the fact that the Armenians ran all the banks and were overrepresented in business and law. I swear I've heard that before, but later in history. Yes, this is where the Young Turks news show gets their name, but I'm sure they were more focused on the revolutionary history rather than the nationalist stuff. In 1909, there was a counter-coup against the Young Turks and the Constitution, which just spilled over into killing anyone perceived to not support the Sultan, which led to the deaths of 15,000 to 30,000 Armenians. The counter-coup failed and the Young Turks stayed in power, specifically a faction led by the three pashas known as the Committee of Union and Progress, or CUP, which is the faction that remains in power and carries out everything that follows. Then in 1912, the Balkan Wars occurred between the Balkan states and the two major empires in the region. It's very complicated and messy, so we won't get into it, but the important part is that the Ottoman Empire lost all of its holdings in Europe. Nothing gets that nationalist blood boiling quite like losing. The Balkan states also decided to take this opportunity to expel every Muslim from the region, sending 850,000 refugees into Anatolia. So the board is set, the pieces are in the right place. The Ottoman Empire has suffered numerous defeats, successful and attempted coups, and is looking for someone to blame. Then a Serbian nationalist decides to assassinate the leader of a foreign imperial power. The main goal of the Ottoman Empire during World War I was to regain all of the territory it lost since 1878, and also answer the Armenian Question. The Ottomans were engaged on three fronts: in Gallipoli against the British and French, in Mesopotamia and Persia against the British and Russians, and the Caucasus against just the Russians, where the Ottomans were losing badly. The Turks tried to get the Armenians to fight the Russians, but they just wouldn't. So after every loss, suspicions of a secret alliance went around, especially after the siege of Van. In April 1915, a Turkish general wanted to conscript every man in the city of Van, primarily made up of Armenians, who refused to join the Turkish army, suspecting that it was actually just a ruse for a mass execution, which it was, just for the record. So the Turkish general decided to turn his weapons on the town in retribution. That's a Turkish general with a Turkish army laying siege to a Turkish town. The Armenian forces kept the Turkish forces at bay for a month until Russian forces arrived to save them, thus reinforcing the Russian collusion narrative in the minds of the Ottomans. Every time a country loses a war or the economy is in the toilet, we look for someone to point the finger at as the cause of our troubles. Because of course, it can't be us. So whether it's protesting hippies, foreigners taking your jobs, or a minority group who seems to be in charge of all of the money and present at every military loss, someone's to blame. So in the middle of the first global war in history, the Ottoman Turks decided to get rid of anyone that they sensed to be a threat to national security, which in this case was anyone who wasn't an Ottoman Turk. The Ottomans just watched the Balkan states expel every non-Christian from their land, and Turkey is still dealing with almost 1 million refugees. So Turkey felt justified in expelling every non-Muslim. This event is known as the Armenian Genocide, genocide being a somewhat important word. But just as the Holocaust wasn't only Jewish people, the Armenian Genocide wasn't just Armenians. They were the largest group by far, which is probably why it's named that. 1.5 million Armenians lost their lives, along with 750,000 Greeks and 350,000 Assyrians. But it didn't start with the expressed goal of killing them. In 1913, the Ottomans created the Special Organization, tasked with the relocation of all ethnic minorities. They were kind of like the Ottoman SS, but again, decades before the actual SS. During the siege of Van, the Special Organization started relocating and deporting any non-Turkish citizens from Anatolia, the region we would later call Turkey. It started in the capital of Istanbul, though it wasn't actually Istanbul at the time, it was still Constantinople.
Istanbul was
While you might think the Greeks would have been pushed towards Greece, everyone was generally pushed in a southeasterly direction. Armenians and Assyrians were marched into the Syrian desert, where it was expected that they would die. One of the common defenses Turkey uses against the claim of genocide is that it was just a deportation. Anyone who died along the way was just accidental. That defense fell apart in 2017 when telegrams were discovered showing the Ottoman government ordered the killings. Most Armenians and Assyrians were force-marched under brutal conditions to Deir ez-Zor in the middle of the Syrian desert, with just enough supplies to make it there. People were expected to survive on just 150 grams of bread a day during the journey, which is this much bread, by the way. I did the math. Assuming they survived the journey, which 90% of them did not, once they arrived, they died. Even if they tried to leave, they'd die before they made it anywhere. From starvation, dehydration, and good old-fashioned killing. This is near the beginning of World War I. Methods of mass killing like chemical weapons weren't available yet, so people were just shot or beheaded, or any other conventional way you can think of. There were 25 concentration camps, 5 of which were specifically death camps. Yes, there is a difference. There were some mass graves with 60,000 people in them, which, do you know how big of a mass grave you would have to dig to fit that many people? If you were to perfectly stack everyone, minimizing empty space between them, you would still need 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools to fit 60,000 people. Yes, I did the math. 80,000 people were burned alive in the city of Moose, and 50,000 people were mass drowned. If you look at this map for longer than a second, you'll soon come across these dots to the north. Were people being deported across the Black Sea to Russia? No. People were being deported to the Black Sea. 50,000 people were taken out to the middle of the water and thrown off the boat. There were other features that we've come to expect from genocides, like medical experimentation, property destruction, and rapes. So many rapes, which I don't understand in this context. Or any context, really. You hate a people so much that you're marching them out of your country. You want to kill them. They're inferior and subhuman. But you're willing to look past that for a few minutes? Accounting for inflation, almost $55 billion worth of property was destroyed. 2,000 churches were burned, and millions of people were displaced or killed. Most of this happened during the summer of 1915, but it continued throughout the war. Teddy Roosevelt would go on to say that this was the greatest crime of the war. It was reported on almost daily, and the US wasn't even in the war yet. And much like Nanking, there are dozens of foreign accounts of the events.
The Turks know that the Christian nations are too busy to take care of the Armenians, so they take advantage of the time to destroy their enemies. It is quite obvious that the purpose of their departure is the extermination of the Armenian people.
After the war, those responsible for the genocide, including the 3 pashas, were charged with war crimes and the CUP was dissolved. But that fell apart at the same time as the Ottoman Empire. Their Middle Eastern holdings were divided between the British and the French, and the Caucasus were given to the Russians. The Turkish people abolished the monarchy, consolidated themselves into Anatolia, renamed it Turkey, and renamed the capital Istanbul. There was significant internal political strife, as you can imagine. But they still found time to fight the newly re-established Republic of Armenia in the Turkish-Armenian War, where another 100,000 Armenians died, while also having to fight Azerbaijan in the Armenian Azerbaijani War. These names are really uncreative. Wait, how did Azerbaijan get involved in all of this? When the Armenians were fleeing Turkey, were they encroaching on ancestral Azeri lands? No. In fact, Azerbaijan didn't exist until 1918. It became a country the same day as Armenia, actually, though Armenia existed for over 1,000 years before the Ottomans took it over. It's where Noah's Ark landed, after all. Azerbaijan has no previous history. The answer is that people who live in Azerbaijan are Azeri Turks, just another group of Turks. Turks are an ethnic group. Just like Arabs or Slavs, they are a separate group, containing several other groups like the Ottomans and the Azeris within it. All Turks hate Armenians. So the Azeri Turks joined the Turk Turks in fighting the Armenians until the Soviets took over in 1920. The Soviets somehow managed to keep the peace in a region that, like the Balkans, is very messy. I mean, part of Azerbaijan is on the other side of Armenia, and the disputed state of Nagorno-Karabakh lies entirely within Azerbaijan, not to mention Chechnya and the South Ossetian independence movement from Georgia. But once the Soviet Union started to fall apart in the late 80s and early 90s, things in the Caucasus started to fall apart too, and the Armenians and Azeris have been fighting each other in the streets on and off ever since. The Soviet Union is actually a big part of the problem here. You see, I just told you about the Armenian Genocide, a true historical event that happened. You would think it would be that simple, but only a handful of countries recognize it. The United States federal government does not, but 49 individual states do. It's Mississippi, before you pause to Google it. Here's a map of all the countries and states that will openly agree that a thing happened. There are some notable absences here, including the US, the UK, Israel, and of course, Turkey. The current Turkish government does not recognize the Armenian Genocide, and anyone who does risks losing their diplomatic ties. Erdogan just denounced the Pope for calling it a genocide. Instead, Turkey calls it the events of 1915. Their defense is as shaky as you would expect. It didn't happen, and even if it did, it wasn't deliberate, so it wasn't a genocide. But it didn't happen. It definitely did happen. The evidence is overwhelming, and with the newly discovered telegrams, it's impossible to say that it wasn't deliberate. It was the Ottoman Empire, not Turkey. This is the only one that I can actually maybe give them some credit for because it's true. The Ottoman Empire ceased to exist in 1922. Unlike Japan, who is another genocide denier, it's not the same government that perpetrated the crime. However, you'd still have to admit there was a crime. Changing your name doesn't really wipe away your responsibility. It's a step in the right direction, but only if you take responsibility, like Germany did after they changed governments. More Turks died in the war than Armenians. Firstly, that isn't true, but secondly, I don't know where this number argument came from. I see it all over the place, even for things like the Holocaust and Native Americans. There is no number requirement for a genocide. Genocide wasn't a crime in 1915 and didn't exist as a concept for decades afterwards. You can't charge someone with a crime before it was a crime. That's true. The term genocide was coined in 1943 and first published in 1944 to describe what Hitler was doing in Europe. World War II wasn't over yet when it was created. Raphael Lemkin, who invented the term, didn't know everything about the Holocaust yet, so I'll give you one guess as to what event he was looking at when coming up with the definition for his new word. Did you guess the Armenian Genocide? Because it's the Armenian Genocide. So the UN definition of genocide fits the Armenian Genocide because this definition was written specifically for the Armenian Genocide. So yes, it was a genocide. The first genocide, in fact. The Holocaust was the first genocide to be tried as a new crime, and yes, there were genocides throughout history before that, but this was the first officially defined one. So why do so few countries recognize it? Because of the Soviet Union. Turkey is the second largest country in NATO and sits in a strategic location for missile bases and is an important crossroads for trade. It is Russia's only real access to the Mediterranean. It was also the first country in the region to recognize Israel. It is an extremely important country for numerous reasons. Because of that, they are the friend that we know has skeletons in their closet, but we ignore them and tolerate their presence because we need the access they provide. Nearly every American politician agrees that the Armenian Genocide occurred.
2 years ago, I criticized the Secretary of State for the firing of U.S. Ambassador to Armenia, John Evans, after he properly used the term genocide to describe Turkey's slaughter of thousands of Armenians starting in 1915. As president, I will recognize the Armenian Genocide.
Right up until they become important on the world stage. Then, suddenly the word genocide disappears from their vocabulary, even on Armenian Remembrance Day. We cannot continue to look the other way. The longer we enable it, the more likely they are to keep doing it. Tensions between the Turks and Armenians have been escalating ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. it's entirely possible that another war could break out at any moment. Nagorno-Karabakh, also known as the Republic of Artsakh, is a semi-autonomous region claimed by both Armenia and Azerbaijan and is currently under military blockade. Some people are accusing the Armenians of using history to gain political favor. History that the Turks deny ever happened. And here's the real kicker: the fact that Turkey faced no consequences for the Armenian Genocide is what inspired Hitler to think he could get away with the Holocaust.
Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?
Well, I do, and now you do too. We've examined a number of different genocidal events on this channel over the last few years. This used to jokingly be known as the Genocide Channel. TM. But in researching this one, I found myself saying things like, oh, just like the Nazis, or oh, that also happened in Nanking, far too many times. The similarities are scary. The Ottoman Turks blamed the Armenians for their woes, and the genocide started as a deportation program, just like Hitler did with the Jews. Turkey changed governments after the war, just like Germany, but continues to deny their crimes, just like Japan. It wouldn't be so scary that the Armenian genocide is just an amalgamation of other genocides, if not for the fact that it took place first. This is the original genocide. TM. History rhymes more often than it repeats, and we see the same patterns echo across time. Most major projects in history, good and bad, seem to follow the same basic formula. A formula you can learn on Skillshare by going to skl.sh/knowingbetter10. Skillshare is an online learning community with over 25,000 courses taught by experts in their field. Take this course in how to create your own custom productivity system, learning how to use different tools and apps to get more work done, rather than just sending incriminating telegrams. Or this course in how to use project management to achieve your goals. Kind of a good thing this didn't exist 100 years ago. Not everyone should achieve their goals, but you can with an annual subscription costing less than $10 a month. And if you head over to skl.sh/knowingbetter10, you can get 2 months of unlimited access to all of Skillshare's courses for free. You'll also be supporting the channel when you do. The more people who know about this event and that it actually happened, the fewer people can continue to deny it. Yes, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks used to deny the genocide in the 90s.
I'm a Turkish American, and I grew up believing the things that I was taught.
But has since come around, saying it was a real thing just 2 months ago.
The Armenian Genocide happened. It existed. It's true. Okay? I don't know how I could be any clearer than that.
He's come under fire for only believing it because of public pressure, but I don't care how you arrive at the right answer, just that you arrive at the right answer. I would prefer that he cracked open a book and changed his own mind, but hey. With enough international pressure, Turkey and Azerbaijan might admit their past and normalize diplomatic relations with Armenia. Once they do that, we can figure out how to prevent it in the future. I don't know about you, but finding out that many of the characteristics of other more famous genocides are just echoes of what happened to the Armenians was frustrating. I don't want history to rhyme anymore, and I hope you don't either, because now you know better. I'd like to give a shout out to my newest Golden Fork patrons, Aaron, John, Tunnelgram, Brian, and Kevin. Sorry for not saying your names in the last video. If you'd like to add your name to this list of deportees, head on over to patreon.com/knowingbetter, or for a one-time donation, paypal.me/knowingbetter. Don't forget to relocate that subscribe button, check out the merch at knowingbetter.tv, follow me on Twitter and Facebook, and join us on the subreddit.